In the year 1887, a girl of 12 years old stood at the altar of a remote Massachusetts chapel, dressed not in white silk, but in the faded burial shroud of her dead mother. Her name was Mercy Harrow, and within a year she was pregnant. Not by love, not by chance, but by the deliberate design of men who hid behind pulpits, papers, and power. The record books list only fragments: a marriage license stamped by a trembling county clerk, an obituary that came too early, and the faint, burned edges of a diary found decades later. Yet the real story, Mercy's story, was buried alive, buried by the very institutions that swore to protect her. This is not a tale of a forgotten child bride. It is the story of an entire town bound by silence, where bloodlines twisted, where children vanished, and where God himself seemed weaponized against the innocent. Northfield, Massachusetts, 1880s. On maps it appears ordinary, a farming community of 200. Wooden mills by the Connecticut River, a brick seminary on the hill, a church whose bell was said to never ring at midnight. But beneath the surface, Northfield was controlled by a coalition of church elders and land barons who intermarried until their surnames became synonymous with law itself. Harrow, Wainwright, Carow. Bell. To live in Northfield was to obey. Children were christened under watchful eyes. Women vanished into sanitariums if they refused marriage. Orphans were adopted into silence. And then there was the chapel, a building no outsider was ever allowed to enter after dusk. It was here, behind barred windows and locked doors, that Mercy Harrow was wed at 12 years old. Witnesses say the pews were filled, but not a single person spoke when the vows were recited. Only the rustle of old hymnals and the scratch of a quill recording it all in the church ledger, a ledger that would later disappear. Mercy was described as small, pale, and often mute. Neighbors claimed she suffered from fits of silence, though in truth, silence was forced upon her. She was the last surviving child of the Harrow family after her father's sudden drowning in the river and her mother's mysterious illness that left her buried within 3 days. The Harrows were a wealthy clan, owners of farmland and a cotton mill. Mercy's guardianship fell into the hands of her uncle, Ezekiel Harrow, a towering man who preached each Sunday on purity, obedience, and sacrifice. It was Ezekiel who arranged Mercy's marriage. The man she wed was nearly 40. A deacon, a man with trembling hands and a wife already locked away in Worcester asylum. No one in Northfield questioned it. No one dared. Mercy was told she was chosen, that her womb was sacred soil, that she was fulfilling prophecy. And so, at 12 years old, she became both bride and prisoner. In 1921, nearly 40 years after her death, a thin leather-bound diary surfaced during the demolition of the old seminary. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded, but one entry remained legible. He says, "God has entered me, but I feel only his breath. He says this is blessing, but I feel only burning. The women watch me, they do not speak. The walls of the chapel do not let sound escape." No one knows how the diary survived. Rumors say the seminary's basement was built directly over the crypt where Mercy was laid, that the diary was buried with her, sealed in stone until the building cracked decades later. Historians dismissed it as fabrication. Locals knew better, because in Northfield, families still whispered about the Harrows, about the girl who bled for weeks, about the child who was born and never seen again. By the spring of 1888, Mercy's body had begun to change. She was 12 years old, her frame barely strong enough to carry a child, her voice breaking into high, startled sobs at night that were never answered. Neighbors noticed her swelling form but pretended not to. In Northfield, questions were sins. Whispers were punishable by exile. To speak against the church was to risk losing your land, your children, or your sanity, since the asylum loomed as the silent punishment for dissent. The official record mocks her as expectant with blessing, yet behind closed doors she was confined to the attic of the Harrow home. Servants said her windows were nailed shut, food was left at the door, and each night a circle of matrons from the church entered her chamber, praying in harsh, rhythmic voices until Mercy screamed into her sheets. Some say the prayers weren't for her health, but to keep something else inside her womb from stirring. On December 2, 1888, Mercy gave birth. The midwife's name never appeared in any ledger. Only one detail survived: the baby never cried. Some claimed the infant was stillborn, its skin gray, its body limp. Others whispered of deformity, a child with features no one dared describe aloud. The official record states, infant male deceased at birth, buried in unmarked ground by order of church. But the diary tells something darker. They would not let me see him. I heard a sound, not a cry but a low hum like bees in the walls. I begged for him. They took him into the chapel and locked the doors. The women came back with their hands stained. Mercy's body never recovered. Her blood ran for weeks, yet the church ordered silence, decreeing her survival proof of divine favor. The baby's grave was never found, but in the woods behind the chapel there are 7 small mounds of earth, each marked only with a stone. After the birth, Mercy was seen less and less. Some neighbors swore she was locked in the seminary's crypt, her pale face glimpsed through the iron grates as students walked above. Others believed she had gone mad, carted off to Worcester like so many women before her. But the truth was simpler and more chilling. She lived for 2 more years. Reports surfaced of a girl wandering Northfield's fields at dusk barefoot, whispering to herself. Farmers said they found symbols carved into fence posts, circles intersected with crosses, stains that would not wash away. And then, one winter morning, Mercy was found collapsed in the snow outside the chapel doors. Her lips were blue. Her hands clutched her stomach as if still heavy with child. She was 14 years old. And she was dead. The town buried her in a stone vault beneath the chapel. No marker, no hymns, just silence. In 1893, a state inspector visited Northfield after rumors of irregular marriages and child wards reached Boston. He demanded access to the church ledger, the book where every wedding, every baptism, every burial was recorded. But when the book was opened, whole sections had been cut away with a blade. Pages missing, names erased, dates smudged. The inspector pressed further, asking about Mercy Harrow. He was told there was no such girl, no marriage, no child. Yet the inspector noted something peculiar. The chapel's floorboards near the altar were newly replaced, the wood stained darker than the rest. And in the seminary library he found a hymn book with words scribbled in a child's hand. He is not dead. They keep him below. The inspector filed his report, but it was never published. Weeks later, he was transferred west. His name disappeared from the state rolls, and in Northfield the silence continued. By the turn of the century, Northfield was outwardly unchanged. The mills turned, the church bells rang, the seminary admitted new students. But strange rumors spread among them. Seminary boys claimed to hear knocking from beneath the chapel floor during evening prayers. Some swore they heard the muffled sound of an infant crying long after midnight. Others reported that the stone vault where Mercy was buried emitted a faint humming sound, low, steady, vibrating through the ground like an insect swarm. One student, Samuel Brigham, left a letter describing it. It is a song without words, carried in the walls. They say it is the voice of the Harrow child. Some nights I feel it move beneath the pews, as if the stones are breathing. Weeks after writing this, Brigham was expelled for moral corruption. His belongings were burned, his name struck from the seminary records, but local children still sang a rhyme on winter nights. Mercy sleeps, Mercy weeps, Mercy keeps the child beneath. The Harrow family did not fade with Mercy's death. Ezekiel Harrow, her uncle, rose to even greater influence, controlling both the church and the mills, binding townsfolk with debt and doctrine alike. His sermons turned strange, speaking of purity through suffering, and blood that seeds the kingdom. Those who questioned him were shunned or forced into the asylum. His daughters married into the Bell and Harrow families, creating a dynasty that held Northfield in a silent grip. But Ezekiel's own journals, hidden for decades, reveal a darker obsession. He wrote of Mercy not as a niece, but as a vessel. He described the infant as a bridge between flesh and eternity. And most disturbingly, the child was not lost. The child was taken back into the earth, where it stirs, awaiting the appointed hour. If true, this meant the church had not buried a stillborn. They had hidden something. And Mercy's blood was only the beginning. Between 1895 and 1907, at least 7 young girls disappeared from the area surrounding Northfield. Their names never appeared in regional newspapers. though families filed desperate reports. Each was between 11 and 14. Each was last seen near the church or seminary grounds. Locals whispered of the Harrow brides, children taken to replace Mercy, chosen to continue the ritual she began. Some said their families were compensated with land or forgiven debts. Others believed the girls were orphans, erased before they could be remembered. One farmer claimed he saw a pale child standing in the churchyard at night, her dress soaked in blood, her hands reaching through the iron gate. By dawn, she was gone. The church dismissed it all as hysteria, but in the archives of Worcester Asylum, a physician noted a patient's repeated claim, "They take the girls below. The child below must be fed." In 1912, the Northfield Chapel was nearly destroyed by fire. Flames devoured the roof, the bell tower collapsed, and yet the crypt beneath remained untouched. When workers cleared the debris, they discovered the vault sealed tighter than ever, its stone door blackened but unbroken. Rumors spread that the fire had been set from within, that something had tried to escape. The townsfolk rebuilt the chapel quickly, this time with reinforced stone. The sermons resumed within weeks, but a strange decision was made. The church bell, once a call to prayer, was never recast. From that day on, Northfield's Sundays were marked only by silence. One carpenter later confessed that while rebuilding, he saw carvings in the foundation stone, circles intersected with crosses, identical to the symbols Mercy had once etched into fence posts. He asked what they meant. He was told, "Do not ask again." In 1924, a folklorist from Boston, Dr. Henry Kincaid, arrived in Northfield. His interest was academic, tracing New England marriage customs and the persistence of child betrothal in rural communities. At first, the townspeople welcomed him. They offered guest rooms, fresh bread, polite smiles. But as soon as he asked about Mercy Harrow, their warmth evaporated. Doors closed. Conversations ended abruptly. His notes were stolen from his boarding room twice. Kincaid persisted. In a letter to a colleague, he described finding scraps of burned paper in the chapel yard, fragments of a diary page, a girl's handwriting, phrases half legible. "The humming never stops, blood on the cloth. He sleeps in the floor." Days later, Kincaid vanished. His belongings remained, his horse still tethered at the inn. The town claimed he had returned to Boston, but no train conductor, no station record, no colleague ever saw him again. In 1931, nearly half a century after Mercy's death, a seminary student named Robert Alden recorded a secret testimony. His notebook, hidden in a hollow beam, was discovered only in the 1970s. Alden wrote of midnight gatherings in the chapel crypt, ceremonies attended by the most prominent families of Northfield. He claimed the rituals were not Christian at all, but older, rooted in blood, binding, rites whispered to have come from Europe with the first settlers, and at the center of these rites always was the figure of Mercy Harrow. Alden described her as eternal bride, eternal mother, sealed in stone, invoked in silence. The elders prayed not to Christ, but to the child below, whom they believed was Mercy's stillborn, yet not still at all. His final entry reads, "They say his body is incorrupt, that he grows though buried, that one day he will be brought forth and Northfield will prosper forever." 3 days later, Alden drowned in the Connecticut River. His death was ruled accidental. In the archives of Worcester Asylum, letters survive from a woman committed in 1890, just 2 years after Mercy's birth. Her name was Abigail Wainwright, a cousin of the Harrows. Her letters, though disjointed, form a chilling echo of Mercy's own diary. She wrote of being chosen, of elders who watch while I sleep, of a child with eyes like glass who moves in the dark. One passage is particularly haunting. The girl, "Mercy was not the first, I was first. The child came dead but not silent. I saw his mouth move. I saw the women press their hands upon him until he sank into the stone. I begged them not to, but they said the stone would keep him alive." Abigail lived 30 years in the asylum, speaking of the child beneath the chapel until her death in 1920. Her doctors dismissed it as hysteria. But in Northfield, the Wainwrights gained land and influence. By 1940, Northfield began to change. The mills shuttered, families moved away, the seminary closed after enrollment dwindled to nothing, but the chapel remained, always the chapel, The state ordered the road leading into the old town sealed during wartime rationing, citing infrastructure collapse. Yet locals whispered that the closure had another purpose. Travelers who wandered too close reported hearing singing from the woods at night, low, wordless, unbearably mournful. One war veteran described it in a letter. It was not church music. It was the sound of a mother still weeping for a child. But the child answered, and his voice was deeper than any man's. The state mapmakers erased Northfield entirely by 1946. No census, no post office, no record. But the chapel still stands, its windows boarded, its bell long gone, and beneath it the vault waits. In 1952, state surveyors entered the ruins of Northfield. Preparing the land for rezoning, they found the chapel still intact, its doors chained but its stone unbroken. Against protocol, 2 workers forced entry into the crypt. They expected dust, bones, perhaps a collapsed coffin. Instead, they found the vault empty. Mercy Harrow's name was carved faintly into the inner wall as if by a child's fingernail, but no body, no coffin, only a dark stain on the floor in the shape of a circle, and in its center fresh scratches, gouged deep into the stone as if something had clawed from within. The workers sealed the crypt and fled. Their report would altered, their names redacted from state payroll records. Both men died within a year. One hanged himself in his barn, the other drowned in his own well. In the decades that followed, Northfield became a ghost town. The last of the Harrows relocated quietly, their records vanishing into marriage names and burned deeds. The chapel was left to rot, swallowed by vines, its foundation cracking into the soil. Yet silence does not erase memory. Families who fled Northfield carried fragments of the story, whispered rhymes, veiled warnings, half-legible diaries. A girl wed at 12, pregnant before her 13th year, a child who was born without breath but not without voice. Historians who stumble across the fragments find themselves met with resistance. Letters vanish from archives. Microfilm reels are found blank. University funding dries up overnight. It is as though someone, something, wants the story of Mercy Harrow to remain unspoken. In 1976, an urban explorer broke into the chapel ruins and claimed to photograph the crypt. Only one image survived, and it was published briefly in an obscure folklore journal before the issue was withdrawn. The photograph shows the stone circle where Mercy's coffin should have been, and in its center, blurred but undeniable, the outline of a child, not a skeleton, not dust, but flesh. Small, pale, and impossibly preserved, the child's eyes are closed, but the lips are slightly parted. Every known copy of the photograph was confiscated. The journal's editor disappeared 2 months later. The explorer who took the photo was found in his car with his throat cut. Official cause, suicide. But those who saw the image said the same thing. The child was still growing. Today, Northfield no longer appears on maps. The land has been declared unfit for habitation. Roads reroute around it. Even satellite images blur unnaturally, as if the earth itself refuses to be seen. But travelers who lose their way in rural Massachusetts sometimes tell stories. A girl walking barefoot along the roadside at dusk, her dress torn, her hands clutching her stomach as though heavy with child. A voice in the fields, humming low like bees trapped in wood. A chapel bell ringing though no bell remains. And sometimes, just before the sun disappears, a child's laughter drifts across the trees. Not joyous, not innocent, but ancient. They say it is Mercy Harrow, still 12, still pregnant, walking forever with the weight of what was forced upon her. They say the child she carried never died, but waits beneath the soil, humming, growing, patient. And they say the silence of Northfield is not absence, it is protection, because some stories were never meant to be told.